The razor's cold edge pressed deeper into Ray Carter's throat, drawing a thin line of crimson. Bumpy Johnson's whiskey-smooth voice turned to ice. "You said confirm the perimeter." "Street soldiers don't talk like that, cop." Ray's pulse thundered. Then Bumpy glimpsed the birthmark. His hand trembled. "That mark. Sarah's mark. You're her son." Detective Ray Carter stared at his reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror of his Harlem apartment, barely recognizing the man staring back. 6 months of living as Raymond Razor Collins had transformed him. The beard was thick and unkempt. Fresh tattoos crawled up his arms, crude prison ink that told stories of violence and survival. Dark circles haunted his eyes from countless sleepless nights spent walking the razor's edge between cop and criminal. This was the face of a man who'd been swallowed by the streets, and Ray had to admit, the disguise was perfect. Every single morning began the same way. Wake up at dawn. Check the burner phone hidden inside the toilet tank for coded messages from his handler, Lieutenant Sarah Morrison. Destroy any trace of communication. Then step back into the skin of Razor Collins, a debt collector fresh out of Rikers with a reputation for efficiency and silence. The kind of man Bumpy Johnson needed in his organization. But Ray wasn't doing this for glory or promotion. This was personal, carved deep into his soul like initials in stone. 3 months before he went undercover, his partner, his best friend, Detective Mike Torres, had vanished after investigating Bumpy's operation. 2 weeks later, Mike's body surfaced in the Hudson River, bloated and unrecognizable, with 2 execution-style bullets in the back of his skull and his hands severed at the wrists. A message. The department's investigation hit wall after wall. Bumpy Johnson was untouchable, protected by layers of loyal soldiers, corrupt officials, and a code of silence that was absolute. So Ray volunteered for the suicide mission. He'd grown up in these streets before the academy straightened him out, knew the language, understood the culture. The department created an ironclad cover identity. Raymond Collins, 5 years in Rikers for aggravated assault, certified enforcer with a documented history of collection work for smaller operations. They gave him a past that could withstand interrogation, torture, or deep investigation. Then they erased Detective Ray Carter from existence and sent him into hell. The first month nearly broke him. He started at the absolute bottom, running numbers in freezing weather, standing on corners for 16-hour shifts, proving he could take orders without asking questions. The second month brought collections, showing up at bodegas and restaurants that owed protection money, delivering Bumpy's message with just enough violence to be convincing, but not enough to draw police attention. Ray documented everything in his photographic memory, building a mental case file that would eventually bury the entire organization. By month 4, something shifted. Bumpy's lieutenant started using his name with respect. Razor's reliable, they'd say. Razor handles his business. And by month 6, Ray had achieved the impossible. He'd earned a seat at Bumpy Johnson's private table at the Cotton Club, where the jazz was loud enough to drown out federal surveillance, and the real power moves happened over expensive whiskey and Cuban cigars. He was finally inside. He was finally close enough to bring down the man who'd killed Mike Torres. He just had to maintain the lie a little longer. The moment Ray truly became one of Bumpy's trusted soldiers arrived on a freezing October night that would haunt him forever. He was standing outside the Cotton Club with 2 of Bumpy's mid-level enforcers, smoking a cigarette and trying not to think about how many laws he was breaking just by association. The street was quiet, the kind of deceptive calm that Harlem wore like a mask before violence erupted. Then a black Cadillac rolled up, windows down, and Ray's police instincts screamed danger before his conscious mind even registered the threat. 3 Italian mobsters from the Genovese family stepped out, led by a muscle-bound enforcer named Sal Marconi who carried a reputation for sadistic creativity. They weren't there for conversation. Sal pulled a switchblade, the steel catching streetlight as he pointed it directly at Ray. "You work for Bumpy?" Sal's Brooklyn accent was thick as concrete. "You tell that uppity bastard that Harlem ain't his no more. Tell him the Italians are taking back what's ours." "Starting tonight." Ray's training kicked in before he could stop it. He saw the blade's trajectory, calculated the three attackers' positions, assessed threat levels and response options in milliseconds, exactly how the police academy had taught him. But he couldn't fight like a cop. He had to fight like Razor Collins would fight, dirty, brutal, and without mercy. When Sal lunged forward, Ray didn't retreat. He stepped inside the blade's arc, caught Sal's wrist, and twisted with enough force to snap bone. The switchblade clattered to the pavement as Sal screamed. The other two mobsters rushed him simultaneously. Ray took a fist to the ribs that cracked something inside, tasted blood in his mouth, but kept moving. He grabbed the second attacker by the throat and slammed him face first into the Cadillac's hood, once, twice, until the man went limp. The third pulled a gun. But Ray was faster. Years of tactical training translated into street fighting as he disarmed the weapon and delivered an elbow strike that shattered the man's nose in an explosion of blood and cartilage. 45 seconds. 3 men down. Ray standing over them, breathing hard, his knuckles split open and bleeding. He hadn't noticed Bumpy Johnson watching from the Cotton Club's entrance until he heard the slow, deliberate sound of applause. Bumpy stood there in an immaculate three-piece suit, a thin cigar between his fingers, his expression unreadable. That, Bumpy said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had built an empire, was impressive. "You move like someone with professional training, Razor." "Military? Special forces?" It was a test. Ray knew it instantly. One wrong answer and 6 months of undercover work would evaporate. "Rikers," he said, forcing his breathing to slow. "You learn real quick inside, or you don't survive." I had good teachers. Bumpy's eyes studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then he smiled, a rare expression that transformed his face from intimidating to almost paternal. "Come inside," he said. "We need to talk about your future in my organization." That conversation changed everything. Bumpy laid out the Empire's structure with the precision of a Harvard Business School lecture. He spoke about territory as market share, violence as negotiation tactics, loyalty as the ultimate currency. But more importantly, he spoke about family. "In my world," Bumpy said, pouring them both 20-year-old scotch, "blood means something. Loyalty means something. Betray me, and you die screaming. But earn my trust, truly earn it, and you become more than an employee. You become family. I think you might have what it takes, Razor." Ray felt his stomach twist with guilt even as he nodded acceptance. Over the next 3 months, Ray became Bumpy's right-hand enforcer. He sat in on meetings with suppliers from Colombia. He watched shipments worth millions move through underground networks. He learned about the upcoming operation, the big one, a $3 million heroin shipment arriving at the port of New York that would expand Bumpy's empire into 5 new states. This was the case Ray had sacrificed everything to build. The case that would avenge Mike Torres and put Bumpy Johnson in prison for life. He fed every detail to Lieutenant Morrison through coded dead drops and encrypted burner phone calls. The federal task force was assembling. Everything was falling into place. Ray just had to hold his cover for 2 more weeks. Just 14 more days of living this lie, and justice would finally be served. The Brooklyn warehouse smelled like rust, motor oil, and the kind of cold that settles into abandoned industrial spaces during February. Ray stood among 9 of Bumpy's most trusted soldiers, watching his breath turn to vapor in the frozen air. This was the final planning session before the shipment arrived in 60 hours. Every detail had to be perfect, every contingency accounted for. One mistake would cost millions and probably several lives. Ray's actual mission, feeding information to the feds, meant this meeting would be the last these men would ever have as free men. Bumpy stood at the center of the warehouse, illuminated by harsh work lights that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. He'd spread a detailed map of the port of New York across a makeshift table constructed from wooden pallets. His finger traced the route the trucks would take from the shipping containers to 3 separate distribution points across the city. "We move at 0300 hours, Bumpy explained, his voice echoing off metal walls. "Minimal exposure time." Marcus handles the port contact. Razor, you're with me on the primary truck. We need absolute precision here, gentlemen. The feds have been sniffing around, and I don't want any surprises. The crew nodded in unison, each man understanding his role in the complex operation. Ray had memorized every detail, passed it all to Morrison. Federal agents would be positioned at each distribution point, SWAT teams ready to move, helicopters on standby. This was going to be the biggest drug bust in New York history, and Ray would be the hero who made it possible. Mike Torres would finally have justice. Then Marcus, a scarred veteran who'd been with Bumpy for 15 years, raised a concern about security. "Boss, what about the warehouse on the east side? We got enough eyes watching all the approaches. Last thing we need is cops rolling up while we're moving product." It was a legitimate question, the kind of tactical concern that needed addressing, and Ray's mind, trained by 12 years of police work and countless tactical operations, responded automatically. "Don't worry," Ray said, his voice confident and clear. "I'll confirm the perimeter is secure before we move any shipments." The words left his mouth before his brain could stop them. Confirm the perimeter. 4 words. Standard police radio protocol. The exact phrase he'd used hundreds of times, coordinating raids, securing crime scenes, establishing tactical positions. The kind of language that was drilled into every cop from their first day at the academy. The kind of language that absolutely no street criminal, no ex-con, no enforcer would ever use in casual conversation. The warehouse went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on concrete. Every single man turned to look at Ray with expressions ranging from confusion to suspicion to dawning horror. Ray felt his heart stop beating. His hands went cold. His mind raced through possible explanations, ways to recover, excuses that might save his life. But he saw it in their eyes. They knew. Or at least, they suspected. Bumpy's head tilted slightly, like a predator that had just detected something fundamentally wrong with its environment. His eyes, which had shown Ray warmth and trust just moments before, turned to chips of Arctic ice. "What did you say?" Bumpy's voice was quiet, controlled, which made it infinitely more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "Say that again, Razor." "Exactly what you just said." Ray tried to recover, forcing a casual laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I said I'd make sure the perimeter is locked down tight, boss. Just being thorough, you know how I am." But it was already too late. The damage was catastrophic and irreversible. Bumpy had survived in this business for 30 years by trusting his instincts, and those instincts were screaming at him now. Bumpy moved with the kind of speed that belied his age and reputation. One moment he was standing by the map table, the next he had Ray slammed against the warehouse's brick wall with enough force to crack mortar. The straight razor appeared in Bumpy's hand like magic, his signature weapon, the tool he used to extract truth from liars and traitors. The blade gleamed under the work lights as Bumpy pressed it against Ray's throat, just hard enough to break skin. Ray felt warm blood trickle down his neck, felt the razor's edge kiss his carotid artery. "Confirm the perimeter," Bumpy repeated, his face inches from Ray's, whiskey breath hot against Ray's skin. That's police talk. That's tactical operations language. That's what cops say when they're coordinating surveillance and raids. The razor pressed harder, drawing more blood. No street soldier says that. No ex-con says that. No enforcer who learned to fight in Rikers says that. Only cops say that. Only undercover cops who've been living this life so long, they forget to watch their fucking language. The other men in the warehouse had drawn weapons now, guns pointed at Ray from every direction, cutting off any possibility of escape. This was exactly how undercover operations ended when they went wrong. No dramatic rescues, no last-minute cavalry, just a cold warehouse, a razor at your throat, and the certainty that your body would never be found. Ray had accepted this possibility when he volunteered for the assignment, but accepting death in theory was very different from feeling a blade bite into your flesh while 9 armed criminals surrounded you. "I can explain," Ray started, but Bumpy pressed the razor hard enough to make Ray gasp. "Don't insult my intelligence," Bumpy hissed. "You're a cop. You've been a cop this whole time." 6 months of lies, 6 months of playing me, using me, pretending to be my friend while you built a case to destroy everything I've built. The betrayal in Bumpy's voice was somehow worse than the razor at Ray's throat. I brought you into my inner circle. I trusted you. I called you family. And you're a fucking rat. Bumpy yanked Ray away from the wall and threw him to the concrete floor with enough force to crack ribs. Ray landed hard, tasting blood, his vision swimming with stars. He waited for the gunshot that would end everything. Waited for Bumpy to give the order that would put him in an unmarked grave somewhere in New Jersey. His mind flashed to Mike Torres, to the friend he'd tried to avenge, wondering if Mike had felt this same terror in his final moments. This was how it ended. 6 months of sacrifice, all for nothing. But the gunshot never came. Instead, Bumpy crouched down and grabbed Ray's collar, yanking his shirt aside with violent force that popped buttons and tore fabric. The movement exposed Ray's left shoulder, and Bumpy's hand suddenly froze mid-motion. His entire body went rigid. He was staring at something on Ray's shoulder blade with an expression of absolute shock that transformed his face from fury to something that looked almost like grief. There, on Ray's shoulder, was a birthmark he'd carried his entire life. 3 dark spots arranged in a perfect triangle, each about the size of a dime. His mother had called it his angel's mark when he was a child, said it made him special. It was just a genetic quirk, meaningless to everyone except the woman who'd given birth to him. Ray had never thought about it as anything more than a physical characteristic, something to note on medical forms and ignore otherwise. But Bumpy was staring at it like he'd seen a ghost rise from the grave. No. Bumpy whispered, his voice cracking with emotion Ray had never heard from him before. No. That's not possible. That can't be. He released Ray's collar and stood up, taking several steps backward, the razor hanging forgotten in his trembling hand. Marcus! Marcus! Get the goddamn light over here! Now. Marcus dragged a portable work light closer, bathing Ray's shoulder in harsh illumination. Bumpy leaned in, examining the birthmark with an intensity that bordered on obsession. His fingers traced the edges of the 3 spots, his breathing shallow and rapid. The other men in the warehouse exchanged confused glances, weapons still drawn, but uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Nobody understood what was happening. This wasn't how interrogations went. This wasn't how you handled a cop who'd infiltrated your organization. Where did you get this mark? Bumpy demanded, his voice hoarse. Ray, still on the floor, bleeding and confused, didn't understand the question. I was born with it, he said. It's just a birthmark. My mother had the same one. She told me it ran in her family, that her mother had it too, her grandmother. It's genetic. The words seemed to physically stagger Bumpy. He grabbed a nearby crate for support, and Marcus moved to help him, but Bumpy waved him away. Your mother, Bumpy said slowly, carefully, like he was defusing a bomb with words. What was her name? Her full name. Ray hesitated. His real identity was supposed to stay buried until the moment of arrest, protected by layers of operational security. But something in Bumpy's expression told him this wasn't an interrogation anymore. This was something else entirely, something that transcended the cop and criminal dynamic they'd been locked in. Sarah, Ray said quietly. Sarah Marie Johnson. She married my father, took his name, Carter, but her maiden name was Johnson, Sarah Marie Johnson. He paused, watching Bumpy's face drain of colour. She died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. She lasted 6 months after diagnosis. Bumpy actually stumbled backward like he'd been punched. Marcus had to catch him to prevent him from falling. Sarah, Bumpy repeated, his voice breaking. Little Sarah, my baby cousin Sarah, who disappeared 30 years ago without a trace. He looked at Ray with new eyes, searching his face for features he recognized, for family resemblance he'd been too blind to see before. You're her son. You're Sarah's boy. The warehouse seemed to tilt on its axis. Ray's mind raced, trying to process information that didn't make sense. His mother had never talked about her family, never mentioned relatives in New York, never spoke about her past before Ray was born. She'd raised him alone in Boston, worked 2 jobs to keep them fed and housed, and deflected every question about grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. Ray had assumed it was just painful history, a family that had rejected her, maybe because she'd gotten pregnant young and unmarried. He'd never imagined this. "That birthmark," Bumpy said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion, "is the Johnson family mark. My grandmother had it. My aunt, Sarah's mother, had it. And Sarah had it, right there on her left shoulder blade, exactly where yours is. It's a genetic marker that's been in our family for generations. I'd recognize it anywhere." He pulled out his wallet with shaking hands and extracted a photograph so old and worn it was nearly falling apart. "This is Sarah. June 1965. Her 16th birthday party, 2 months before she vanished." Ray took the photograph with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The young woman in the picture had his mother's eyes, the same dark brown with flecks of gold. His mother's smile, slightly crooked on the left side. His mother's face, decades younger but unmistakably hers. And there, visible because she was wearing a sleeveless summer dress, was the birthmark on her shoulder. The same 3 spots in a triangle. "The angel's mark. She ran away," Bumpy said, his voice distant, lost in memories that clearly still caused pain. "Our family was deep in the life even then. My father was running most of Harlem's numbers and protection rackets. Sarah's father, my uncle, was the enforcer, the muscle. Our whole family was built on crime, violence, power. Sarah hated it. She was smart, wanted to go to college, wanted a clean life away from all this." He gestured vaguely at the warehouse, at the criminal empire he'd built. "She begged me to leave with her. I was 19, stupid, thought I was invincible. I told her she was weak, told her family loyalty meant everything, and if she walked away, she was betraying us all." Bumpy's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "She left anyway. Disappeared in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase and maybe $200. We searched for months, years. My aunt, her mother, died thinking Sarah had been murdered by rivals, that we'd never find her body. I spent 3 decades wondering if I'd driven my baby cousin to her death with my stupid pride and loyalty to this goddamn life." Ray felt like he was drowning in revelation after revelation. "She never told me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She never said anything about Harlem, about the Johnson family, about any of this. She raised me in Boston, kept us isolated. I thought we had no family because they'd rejected her. I never knew she'd run from." He trailed off, looking around the warehouse, at the armed men, at the criminal enterprise he'd infiltrated. "She succeeded," Bumpy said with something that might have been pride mixed with grief. "She got out, built a clean life, raised a son who became a cop, the exact opposite of everything our family stood for. That's what she wanted. That's what she sacrificed everything to achieve." He paused, the irony hitting him with visible force. "And now that son is here, in this warehouse, trying to destroy the family she ran from, trying to put me, her cousin, in prison for life." Bumpy ordered everyone out of the warehouse except Marcus, who'd been his right hand for 2 decades and was more brother than employee. The other soldiers holstered their weapons reluctantly, confusion and uncertainty written across their faces as they filed out into the frozen February night. Ray remained on the concrete floor, no longer restrained but understanding that he was far from free. The razor had been put away, but the situation had somehow become more dangerous than when the blade was pressed against his throat. At least then, Ray had understood the rules of engagement. Now everything was uncharted territory. "You're a cop," Bumpy said, his voice measured and controlled again, the emotion locked back down behind the crime boss persona. "You infiltrated my organization under false pretenses. You've been feeding information to the federal task force for 6 months. You know about the shipment, the distribution network, the suppliers. You have enough evidence to put me and 50 other people in prison for the rest of our lives." He began pacing the warehouse floor, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against concrete. "By every rule of this world I live in, you should already be dead. Marcus would have put 2 bullets in your head and dumped your body where it would never be found." Marcus stood silent near the door, his expression unreadable. hand resting on the gun at his waist. Ray knew Marcus wouldn't hesitate if Bumpy gave the order. Loyalty was absolute in Bumpy's organization, even when that loyalty meant killing someone who'd just been revealed as family. But, Bumpy continued, stopping his pacing to face Ray directly, "You're also Sarah's son. You're my cousin's kid. You carry the Johnson family mark. That means something to me, even if it doesn't mean a damn thing to you." Blood is blood, Detective Carter. In my world, that's not just words. It's sacred. The word hung heavy in the cold air between them. Sacred. Ray found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "I didn't know," he said, meeting Bumpy's eyes. "I swear on my mother's grave I had no idea about any of this. She never told me about the Johnson family, about Harlem, about you. I grew up thinking we were alone in the world because our family had abandoned us. I became a cop because I wanted to protect people, to make a difference. When my partner Mike Torres was murdered, when his body was pulled from the Hudson River, I volunteered for this assignment because I wanted justice. I wanted to bring down the man who killed my best friend." "Mike Torres," Bumpy interrupted, his voice hard. "Your partner. Your best friend. The man whose death sent you on this crusade." He nodded to Marcus, who pulled out a thick manila folder from a briefcase and dropped it on the floor in front of Ray. "Open it. Read it. Then tell me about justice." Ray picked up the folder with trembling hands. Inside were bank statements, surveillance photographs, wiretap transcripts, and incident reports. As he read through them, his entire world crumbled further. The bank statements showed deposits into Mike Torres's personal account totaling over $300,000 over 18 months. The photographs showed Mike meeting with known members of the Genovese crime family. The wiretap transcripts captured Mike discussing police operations, feeding intelligence to the Italians, helping them avoid raids and investigations. "Your partner was dirty," Bumpy said without satisfaction or gloating, just stating facts. "He was on the Genovese family's payroll, working as their inside man in the police department. He was feeding them information about my operations, helping them hit my shipments, sabotaging investigations that might have exposed their activities. Mike Torres wasn't the hero you think he was, Detective. He was a traitor to his badge." Ray felt sick. The evidence was irrefutable. Dates, times, amounts, conversations. Mike had been playing both sides, collecting a salary from the city while working for organized crime. "Why did you kill him then?" Ray asked, his voice hollow. "If he was working for your enemies, why not just expose him?" "Because," Bumpy said, "he got greedy. Started blackmailing the Italians, threatening to expose their operations unless they paid him more. They came to me, asked if I wanted to help solve their Mike Torres problem. I said no. Killing a cop, even a dirty one, brings heat I don't need. But Torres made a mistake. He tried to blackmail me too, threatened to manufacture evidence, to testify that I'd ordered hits on federal witnesses. He was going to send me to prison to save himself from the Italians. So I did what I had to do to survive." Ray stared at the folder, at the photographic evidence of his partner's betrayal. 12 years of friendship, of having Mike's back in dangerous situations, of trusting him with his life. All of it had been built on lies. "He had a wife," Ray said quietly. "A daughter. I went to his funeral, watched them cry over his casket. I promised them I'd get justice. You came here for revenge," Bumpy said, his voice softer now. "But you were avenging a man who betrayed everything you both supposedly stood for. Now what do you do, Detective Carter? Do you still want to destroy me? Do you still want to put your blood in prison? Or do you want the truth about who Mike Torres really was?" Bumpy let the silence stretch for a long moment before speaking again. "The shipment arrives in 72 hours, he said, his voice businesslike now, discussing logistics like they were planning a legitimate business venture. "You've already told your handlers about it. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison and her federal task force are planning a coordinated raid. They'll hit all 3 distribution points simultaneously, bring in SWAT teams, helicopters, the full show. If that raid happens as planned, 50 people go to prison, including me. My organization collapses overnight. And then what happens? He didn't wait for Ray to answer. The Italians move in first. The Genovese family has been waiting for an opening like this for years. Then the Irish from Hell's Kitchen. The Russians are making moves too. Harlem turns into a war zone as everyone fights over the territory I've been controlling. And you know who suffers? The people who live here. The families in the brownstones. The kids walking to school. The old ladies who run the corner stores. I've kept this neighborhood stable for 15 years, detective. I'm a criminal, I know that. But I'm also the reason there hasn't been a gang war in Harlem since the 70s. Ray wanted to argue, wanted to say that the law was the law and Bumpy deserved prison regardless of his rationalizations. But he'd seen enough in 6 months undercover to know that Bumpy wasn't entirely wrong. The organization did maintain a kind of order, a balance of power that prevented worse chaos. That didn't make it right, but it made the situation more complicated than Ray had allowed himself to believe. Here's what I'm offering you, Bumpy continued, moving closer. And I'm only offering this because you're Sarah's son, because you carry the family mark, because blood means something even when everything else is lies. You have a choice to make, and you need to make it in the next 24 hours. Bumpy held up one finger. Choice 1. You walk away. Right now, tonight. You tell Lieutenant Morrison that your cover was blown, that you barely escaped with your life, that the operation is burned and the shipment got cancelled. I'll disappear for a while, let things cool down, reorganize. You go back to your life as a cop. We never see each other again. You pretend this family connection doesn't exist, just like your mother did for 30 years. I won't come after you, won't retaliate, won't expose you. You get to keep your badge, your career, your clean conscience. You can tell yourself you tried to do the right thing. He held up a second finger. Choice 2. You stay. You help me. You feed your handlers false information, misdirect the raid to empty warehouses while the real shipment moves through different channels. When this operation is over and the heat dies down, you leave the police force and come work with me for real. You use your training, your tactical knowledge, your understanding of how law enforcement operates to help me run this organization smarter and cleaner. You become what Sarah ran away from, but you do it as family. You honor the blood that connects us. Ray felt like he was being torn in half. You're asking me to become a criminal, he said, to betray everything I've stood for, everything I've worked for. My badge means something to me. Your badge, Bumpy said, pulling out another folder and tossing it to Ray, is built on a foundation you didn't even know was corrupt. Open it. See what your precious department doesn't want you to know. Ray opened the folder and found more surveillance evidence. But this time, it wasn't about Mike Torres. It was about other cops, detectives taking payoffs, commanders covering up evidence, internal affairs investigators on the take. The corruption went deeper than Ray had ever imagined, right up to the deputy commissioner level. Your department is just as dirty as my organization, Bumpy said. The only difference is they wear badges and pretend they're heroes. At least I'm honest about what I am. I don't hide behind a shield while I break the law. He paused. And there's one more thing you should know before you make your choice. Your mother didn't die of natural causes. The words hit Ray like a physical blow. What? He managed to choke out. The doctors said cancer. Pancreatic cancer. I was there when she did have cancer, Bumpy interrupted. But it didn't kill her. 3 weeks before she died, she called me. First time I'd heard her voice in 30 years. She'd tracked me down through old contacts, found my number. She was dying, wanted to tell me the truth before it was too late. She told me about you. Told me she'd raised a good son, a cop, someone who would never follow in the family's footsteps. She was proud of that. Proud she'd broken the cycle. Bumpy's voice grew harder, but someone in the Genovese family found out about that call. They'd been looking for leverage against me for years, and suddenly they had it. Sarah Johnson, the cousin I'd spent decades searching for, was alive. had a son. They sent someone to Boston, made her death look like natural progression of the cancer. But she was murdered. Detective. Murdered because of her connection to me, because the Italians thought they could use her as leverage if they ever needed to. Ray felt the room spin. His mother. Murdered. The last 3 weeks of her life, when the pain had suddenly intensified, when she deteriorated so rapidly the doctors were surprised. It hadn't been the cancer. Who? He demanded. Who killed her? Vincent Russo. Genovese family enforcer. He used a contact poison, something that mimicked cancer symptoms, accelerated the organ failure, made it look natural. I found out 6 months after she died, when one of Russo's associates got drunk and bragged about it. By then, Russo was already dead, killed in an unrelated mob dispute. I never got the chance to make him pay for what he did to Sarah. Bumpy let that information sink in before continuing. So here's the real choice, detective. You can walk away, pretend this family doesn't exist, pretend your mother's murder doesn't matter. Go back to a department that's just as corrupt as I am, work with cops who are on the same payroll as the men who killed her. Keep the badge, keep the illusion. Or you can stay. Help me. Use your skills to make sure the people who hurt our family never get the chance to hurt anyone else. Become what Sarah ran from, but do it to protect the things she cared about. Ray looked at the photograph of his mother, still clutched in his hand. Young, smiling, wearing that sleeveless dress that showed the birthmark they both carried. He thought about the lies she'd told to protect him, the sacrifice she'd made to give him a clean life. And he thought about the choice she'd made 30 years ago, to run from this family, to reject this world, to build something better. I need time, Ray finally said, his voice hoarse. I need to think. Bumpy nodded. You have 24 hours. Then you decide, family or duty. Sarah's dream or Sarah's blood. The badge or the birthmark. He moved toward the warehouse door, Marcus following. But understand this, detective. Whatever you choose, there's no going back. Choose the badge, and we're strangers. Choose family, and you're mine forever. There's no middle ground. No compromise. No having it both ways. The door closed, leaving Ray alone in the freezing warehouse with a decision that would define the rest of his life. 24 hours later, Ray Carter stood in the warehouse again. The same cold air, the same harsh lights. But everything else had changed. Bumpy and his full crew were assembled, 9 men who'd trusted Razor Collins and now knew he was Detective Ray Carter. The shipment was scheduled to arrive in 12 hours. Lieutenant Morrison was waiting for Ray's final intelligence report, ready to coordinate the biggest drug bust in New York history. Ray reached into his jacket and pulled out his police badge, the shield he'd carried for 12 years, through promotions and commendations and countless dangerous situations. He looked at it for a long moment, remembering the oath he'd sworn, the promise to serve and protect. Then he set it on the table between himself and Bumpy, the metal making a soft click against wood. Next to it, he placed his service weapon. I'm calling it off, Ray said, his voice steady and clear. The raid, the investigation, all of it. I'll tell Morrison that the operation was compromised, that the shipment was cancelled, that the intelligence was bad. I'll take the heat for the blown investigation. It'll probably end my career, but that's my problem. Bumpy's expression revealed nothing. He'd built an empire by reading people, by never showing his cards. So you're choosing family, he said. It wasn't quite a question. No, Ray said, meeting his eyes. I'm not joining you either. I'm not becoming what my mother ran from. I'm walking away from both lives, the badge and the blood. He gestured at the photograph of Sarah that Bumpy still carried, the image of a young woman who'd had the courage to reject everything she'd known to build something better. My mother made a choice 30 years ago. She ran from this family because she knew it would destroy her. She sacrificed everything, her past, her family, her identity, to give me a chance at a clean life. Ray's voice grew stronger. I'm going to honor that sacrifice. Not by putting you in prison, and not by joining your organization. I'm walking away from all of it. I'm leaving the department, leaving New York, starting over somewhere else. I'll find a way to live with what I know about Mike, about the corruption, about everything. But I won't be a cop who looks the other way, and I won't be a criminal who justifies it as family loyalty. Bumpy stood silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "You're more like Sarah than you know," he said quietly. She had the same stubborn pride, the same refusal to compromise her principles, even when it cost her everything. He picked up Ray's badge and gun, holding them out. "Keep these. You earned them honestly, even if the system you served was dirty. Don't throw away 12 years of your life because of one impossible situation." Ray shook his head. "I can't carry that badge knowing what I know. Can't pretend the system works when I've seen how broken it is. My mother raised me to believe in justice, but she also raised me to recognize when something is poisoned beyond saving." "Then what will you do?" Bumpy asked. "I don't know yet," Ray admitted. "Find honest work somewhere. Maybe teach, maybe security, maybe something I haven't thought of yet. But I'll do it clean. No badges I don't believe in. No family loyalty that requires me to become something she died trying to escape." He turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Bumpy. "We're blood. That's a fact I can't change, and I won't deny it. But we'll never be family. Family is built on more than genetics and birthmarks. It's built on shared values, on mutual respect, on wanting the same things for the people you love. My mother understood that when she left. I understand it now." Bumpy nodded slowly, something that might have been respect crossing his features. "If you change your mind—" "I won't," Ray interrupted. "But I'll give you this. I won't testify against you. I won't give Morrison anything she can use. The case dies with me walking away. That's the only compromise I can offer. Not for you, but for Sarah. She wouldn't want her son to destroy her family, even if she chose not to be part of it." Ray walked out of the warehouse into the grey morning light, leaving behind the badge, the investigation, Mike Torres's betrayal, and the family he'd never known he had. Behind him, Bumpy Johnson stood holding the shield of a cop who'd chosen integrity over both duty and blood, the rarest kind of man in a world built on compromises. 3 months later, in a small town in Oregon, a man named Ray Carter started teaching criminal justice at a community college. He never mentioned his past, never spoke about the family he'd left behind in Harlem, never explained the triangle of birthmarks on his shoulder. He taught his students about ethics, about the difference between law and justice, about the impossible choices good people sometimes have to make. And every year on his mother's birthday, he placed flowers on her grave and thanked her for having the courage to run, for giving him a chance at something better, for showing him that family was a choice you made, not just a mark you carried on your skin. The shipment arrived on schedule. The federal raid never happened. And in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson continued running his empire, occasionally wondering about the cousin's son who'd chosen neither the badge nor the blood, but had instead chosen his own path, just like Sarah had done 30 years before.